So I have been an author full-time since 2013. I've had three books out previous to this one. So I write horror and thriller. I sort of straddle that world. And my first three books were considered more thriller. Gated and Astray, my first two books, those are psychological thrillers. And then I did Smash and Grab, which was sort of this heist caper. And now I have Flight 171. But I've been an author for a while. I would say being an author was my midlife crisis. I was a teacher before that and realized I didn't want to go back to the classroom necessarily, but I wanted to do something else. And that's when I decided to be a writer. And once I figured that out, I have been in it 100% ever since. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm down here in Tampa. That's where I live and write from. And yeah, and in my spare time, I watch a lot of horror.
I love this idea of a mid. If you're going to have a midlife crisis, that's about the healthiest one you can have, right? Is something to
Right? It's the least expensive anyway. Like paper and pen are pretty cheap. I didn't go get the sports car or like, the plastic surgery or whatever, all that stuff that costs lots of money that, in a search or quest to be young, I think I just was like, life is too short. What could I do if I could do anything that might make me happy? Because teaching was great. I love kids, but there's a lot about teaching that doesn't involve the teaching aspect of it. So I was looking for something different. So yeah, it was a safer way to have a midlife crisis, maybe. But that's maybe me. I don't think I'm like one of those people who just goes to extremes. So for me, that was extreme, leaving something that seems kind of stable to enter a profession that's 100% not.
Well, counterpoint, if you buy a nice sports car, yes, it's expensive, but it's done. There's no
But it's
emotional
done.
toil. There's no ongoing angst about how am I doing? Is this going well for me? Is it not going
Right.
well?
Very true.
The car's in the garage. You can go out there and visit anytime you want. Done.
Yeah, that is true. But my husband would be like, "They're absolutely not," because as it is, I am like a little too fast a driver. So my kids will tell you, I'm known to get a ticket or two for speeding. So if I had a sports car, it would be bad news.
Gotcha. So if you can't scare people with your horror fiction, you'll scare them with your driving.
I'll scare them on the road, right? Although living in Florida, I don't think I'm probably the scariest driver. We are kind of a crazy lot down here. So Florida, a lot of people like liken our roads to Mad Max, like Thunderdome, and that's kind of what it's like. So
I have driven through Florida, and it's a race in my mind between who of the places I've done some driving. It's a race in my mind between Florida and Tennessee, especially around the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. Those people have roller coaster tracks for roads, and they're still flying across them in 90, 100 miles per hour.
this is true. I know I don't get that. I'm so scared of heights. I do not know how they take those turns. And there's no guardrail. They're just like going. And I mean, and it's narrow. So you can't even get around each other. You do like there's no room for error. You're going off the side of the mountain. And maybe it's the horror writer in me, but I always think of like the worst case scenario that could possibly happen. So yeah, I'm amazed at them too. I've been there a couple of times and just been like, I can't, my husband has to drive because I can't. Not around those roads.
It's just somewhere there's a calculation that so long as everything goes perfectly right and there's
Yeah.
never a problem with my car, I'm definitely going to survive this. I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, maybe, but let's not take that bet. Let's
Right.
I'm used to the flatland, so they'll be honking at me because I'm going 40 miles an hour and they're
Yeah.
65, 70. I'm like, nope, I'm not flying over around that, flying off that cliff. Nope.
Exactly. Maybe like mere survival is kind of a low bar. That's how I look at it. I would rather do a little bit better than that. So,
As soon as I get out of this body cast, I'll be right back on the road.
exactly.
So I know that you had been a stay-at-home mom for a while, and you had what, 8 years as a stay-at-home mom, and you began making up stories for your children. And then you and your husband, I love this, you come to an agreement that you've got about 2 years to become a writer. So how does that work, and what does that 2 years look like?
Well, it was funny because I think Dean Koontz had sort of a similar deal with his wife at some point, and maybe that's where we came up with the idea. Because I think his was a little longer than mine, though. I think he got like 5 years. Um, but where my husband was supportive of the idea of me writing, but it literally came out of the blue. So it wasn't. I was always a reader. I was always somebody who loved books. We knew that, and I think like I always, I was a good writer. I knew that, but I didn't go to school for it. I hadn't written in a really long time, not since, before college. And so when I came to him with this idea, um, I have to hand it to him because he didn't like freak out or think I had lost it or whatever, but he was like, yeah, okay, I think, we can do that. And you've already been home. So I think we could probably manage with you staying home maybe 2 more years before we kind of need you to do something to bring in some money. So it was sort of set for us financially. So our financial situation sort of set that time period. And literally when I started, I knew nothing about the industry. I mean, I Googled, like, how do you write a novel? Like, what is it like to get published? And went down that rabbit hole. And I wrote a really horrible, awful first book. This was back in the time of Twilight. So I had that like broody, don't like me because I'm dangerous guy and all of these things that weren't really me as a writer. It was me trying to like emulate the market at the time, I guess, and learn. And so I wrote this really horrible book and had joined a poetry group because there was no novel writing group in my area. And so I was doing poetry, trying to learn how to write. And I do that like a couple of times a month. And it was put on by a couple of professors at a local college here, St. Leo University. And I learned a lot by writing prose because actually with poetry, every word counts. So what's great about that is you really pay attention on a sentence level, like on that like more minute level. So everything you say has to have power and everything you write. And so that's how I learned. Wrote that really bad book. And while I was writing that, my agent, Lucienne Diver, who you've interviewed before, had come to our writers group. She knew somebody in the group and had kind of come to sort of talk writing as a writer in that capacity. And so we get to know each other as fellow writers, and we sort of shared and swapped work a couple of times. And she took a look at that first novel and said, okay, you have writing talent. However, the story is not sellable. So what else do you have? And at the time, I had my first idea that was really mine. It was something that I came up with on my own that just like really spoke to me. And I kind of pitched her that idea, and she like brightened up and said, okay, write that. And when you get done writing that, send that to me because that sounds interesting. And so that really galvanized me to get going again. So that first novel took me the first like 7, 8 months of that 2 years to write. And then I queried it to like 3. I mean, it was a very small pool of agents because once Lucienne said it wasn't sellable, I believed her and figured it was good to just move on since that was probably not, going to be my first sold book. And I went and dove right into the next project. And that next project took me another like 8-ish months to finish. And then I sent it to her. And literally, I think I sent it to her in November of that year. And she didn't get to read it until after the holidays because she's pretty busy and has kind of a large author roster. But she got to it in January and she read it over a weekend and texted me saying like, I'm halfway through. It's really interesting. More to come. And of course, I had a heart attack when I got that text, thinking, okay, what does this mean? And then the next day, she offered me representation, and we met for coffee, and it took off from there. And then from there, a month later, the book sold. So I made it like just under that 2-year window with that first book selling, but it went really, really fast. I got extremely lucky. I know that my path up front is not normal for most writers at all. But however, a lot of my struggle came after that period of time. So I had a kind of a much easier time up front. And then I went through like a long period where, between published books where I really struggled. So I've paid my dues. I just didn't pay them on the front end. That front end went really fast and I got really lucky.
When Lucine is which, first of all, any writers who are listening should take from this story that you didn't just start writing. You got out and into the community. And what an incredibly fortunate turn of events that you're able to bump into her and have that relationship going. But does she know when she's reading your book that, hey, I'm on a timeline, I'm almost at 2 years, and then I guess I'll be teaching?
No, I never told her that. And actually, what I will say that I did do right is when I met her, I never like actively pitched her my work. I looked at it like she was an agent and I was excited about that. And it was highly unusual because I'm in Tampa, Florida, and most agents lived in New York, especially at that time. And she had just moved down, I think maybe the year before or whatever. But it was extremely lucky to run into her. However, what I did is that I talked to her as a fellow writer, and then I asked her if she needed like a critique partner, if I could read her work. And my thought process was, I can learn a lot from this person. She's a professional. She's been in this world for a long time. Reading her work and seeing it in a raw form and then watching her go through the editing process is going to help me learn as a writer. And so that was one of the things that I did right. And I never pitched her any of my work or talked to her about it for a while. In fact, most of the time she actively asked me because I didn't say anything. And I asked her, you know, a lot about her industry. So we would meet as friends and write. We would do writing sessions at Barnes and Noble. But I would ask her questions in those time periods, but just like fellow writer to fellow writer, never with this pressure that, you know, I was expecting her to represent me or that I expected anything from her. And so by the time that I had some quality work to show her, she was really open to seeing it because I'd kind of proven myself as a critique partner. I'd proven myself as a fellow writer. So we had like a really good sort of personal relationship that then moved into professional. But that I did right, I think. And then when we didn't have a novel writing group in my area, I started my own. So that poetry group I was in, there were several people who also were looking at writing longer form stories. And I established another group with them, and we sort of just peer mentored each other through the process. So those were a couple of things that I think really helped me grow quickly in a short period of time.
Well, for those who are listening and thinking, this sounds great, I want to be like Amy, how do you go about starting your own writing group?
I stole from the original group that I was in. I just leached some of those people into my group. And then some of them had friends, and then it sort of grew from there. But we were pretty small. I think it was like 5 people to start. And then I also went online, and way back in the day, Maggie Stiefvater used to do a critique partner swap on her website. So every once in a while, she would offer this critique swap where you could try to find a fellow critiquer, like somebody who might like your work. And so every time she did that, I would get on. And I knew I was getting better when my offers for fellow critiquers were getting better. I was getting good people. So at that time, I ran into Jennifer Baker, and Jennifer Baker is now a senior editor at Amistad in Random House. So she and I like swapped work early on. This would have been like 2011-ish. And then I swapped with several other people, and one of them is a literary agent, which I didn't know at the time. So what was great about that was there were people who were already in the industry who, when they were reading my raw work, were saying, yeah, I would like to swap with you. And I swapped with them for a good long period of time, and that helped too. So it was reaching out online, and it was also doing some things in person. And I continued with the poetry as well, because like I said, what's great about poetry is it's a totally different form, but you're really looking at language. And so that's great as a writer, is to really pay attention to like the rhythm of language, the way that you pause, because it's in a way a little bit musical. Like when I'm writing, I'm thinking in terms of music, how does it sound to my ear? How do these words sort of come together, and what's the rhythm of that paragraph? And I got that from the poetry. So I would say like all those things really helped. So it's not just like one path. If you're learning to write, you should try to explore like various sides of writing, I would say.